It might have been around the same time that I met Arevik, about 12 years ago. I was traveling in Morocco. Uh, I decided to make a detour, very small detour of about 700 kilometers. The reason for that detour was that I wanted to visit the tomb of one Ibn Battuta. Okay, so it's not a tropical fruit. For those of you who haven't heard the name Ibn Battuta, he was a cartographer, traveler, who around 14th century managed to get from Morocco all the way to China, to India, Central Asia, and many, many other places, which even with the modern modes of transportation, it's difficult to get. People in Europe, they call him the Marco Polo of the Muslim world. I'd like to call Marco Polo the Ibn Battuta of the Western world. So I tried to find, in the city of Tangier, the tomb of Ibn Battuta. With the help of a couple of locals, in very narrow streets, I managed to get to a house which had bars, metal bars, and in it, there was his tomb. Unfortunately, I couldn't go in, so I was holding the bars, looking inside, and kept thinking, what motivated him? What motivates us? Is it a sense of wonder, curiosity, a sense of adventure? Perhaps finding our own self in faraway lands, looking at other humans and find our own humanity. I thought about all of these, but his words actually put it in much, much better way, Ibn Battuta's words. He says, traveling makes you lonely, then give you friends. It keeps you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller. It gives you a home in 1,000 different places, yet it leaves you alone in your own land. I kept thinking about these things. I kept thinking, the reason why I was thinking about these things is because I was going through a transformation myself. For personal reasons, for personal effects, for personal issues, I was transforming, and that trip is always going to remain special for me. I kept thinking about the traveling and keeping in mind that since then, and around then, up until then and since then, I'm someone who has lived in 12 different cities, in 6 different countries, on 3 different continents, traveling to 61 countries, having 3 citizenships, yet I do not belong anywhere. A friend of mine, once having this discussion, this has been always an issue for me, he's sitting here today, actually solved that problem for me. He said, since you don't belong anywhere, you belong everywhere. The transformation that I was going through was personal, but it also embarked me. It put me on the path of journeys of self-discovery. It is also a realization that whenever I start a journey, and I'm in that journey, and after the journey, I'm not the same person. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus has said it well. No person steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, nor they are the same person. Traveling stories are fascinating, but I'm not going to be talking about travel's transformative power. Rather, I'm going to be talking about a different kind of transformation. 2 terms, categorizations rather, that I came up myself. And that doesn't mean that anyway it's good or bad or right or wrong, it's just mine. I categorize transformation into 2 general types, transactional and non-transactional transformations. The first one, it's pretty much straightforward. Transactional transformation is what you do to transform because of either a reward, the promise of a reward, or a fear of punishment. Maybe it's about a job, new job skills you need to learn. So you learn it, you're transforming. A health scare makes you lose weight to feel better and so on and so forth. These are transactional. You're doing it because you have to. And they're tangible. The result, you see it. I have a new skill set. Look, I can do this. Or look, I can do that. Or look, I lost weight. Or I gained weight. Or I have muscles or not, and so on and so forth. That's transactionality. The other type which I coined it myself, and it's a work in progress, and I will try being the operative word, to define and help or explain to you, is non-transactional transformation. This, unlike transactional transformation, is something that you do because you want to do it. In a way, the goal and the process are the same. I want to do good because I just want to do good, not because a scripture or someone said that I should be doing good. And I think the value of non-transactional transformation and non-transactional actions are actually more impactful. They depend on you. And unlike transactionality, you cannot measure. You cannot measure non-transactional transformation because it's happening within you. And if it's happening within you, how do you measure? Well, you can't. No one will be able to measure. Only you will be your own judge. Only you will be the person who can judge how much you transformed. And don't worry about this, because more often than not, one is one's worst critic, so you're going to be harsh on yourself. It is within this context that it is also important to keep in mind that non-transactional transformation is a bridge to become a better person. You become a better person not just for your sake, but also for the sake of the people around you. To paraphrase what Adavik mentioned earlier, I am who you are, but you are who I am. So by being that transactionally transformed person, you're also by default spreading sort of that transformation. Transactional transformations, non-transactional transformation starts with a trigger. I usually, again, categorize. I think the theme of today is two. I categorize into two types of triggers, external and internal. So, how many of you have had a near-death experience? I'm in good company. Okay. Okay, so just to clarify, a near-death experience is not especially in this city when you're crossing the street and you're almost hit by a car. That's not near-death experience. That's everyday life, okay? So a near-death experience, I have a menu of those. Almost being drowned, being hit by a car, being lined up against a wall by militias and, only to be let go after, a long 30 seconds and then hearing the cocking of a gun. Or, for instance, being in a room which gets hit by a rocket like 4 or 5 seconds after you left it. So these are some of the samplings that I've experienced. Let me provide some context. I was born and raised in a war-torn country. And when I say torn, I really mean it. Door-to-door fighting, street-to-street fighting. I had a lovely childhood, by the way. I know it's anachronistic, but I had a happy childhood, even with that. This is a country where a parental advice would not be watch out for the cars when you're playing outside in the street. It would be actually, if you hear shelling, a bomb being fired, and you hear it going away from you, keep playing, it's not going to hit you. But if you hear a bullet being fired, take cover, because stray bullets are unpredictable. Really, what kind of a parental advice would that be? But that was the reasonable advice. For me, it was an external trigger, such a near-death experience that put me on the path of transformation and got me thinking about non-transactionality. I was about 15 or 16, very ripe age, full of wisdom and the arrogance of youth, right? At a time, after that event, within a couple of hours, I was at my neighbor's pantry, lying down, getting ready to sleep. I began to pray, the process of praying, a prayer that my grandmother had taught me, which I had automatically recite every night. I stopped, not even halfway, and I decided that it was time for me to ask questions, and hopefully find answers, but you will never find answers for the right questions, and about God's religion and anything else, about faith and whatnot. This began or marked, in my mind, my journey towards humanism. I'm not going to go into detail for those of you who know it. I think it's another way of saying atheism, but it's humanism, rather. Humanism, the foundation of humanism, is that non-transactional transformation, about doing good for the sake of good, and not be guided by any principles of morality imposed on you by others. So that was the journey. That's how my journey started. This was an external trigger. But you don't need to have a near-that experience to start a non-transactional transformation. I don't want to have any, I have to have that disclaimer, so you don't need to. When we're older, we have experience, we have knowledge, we know things, and we can choose to embark on a non-transactional transformation. Ask questions that don't always come with answers. My experience was an external trigger. When you're younger, you don't have that experience. It has to start something. But triggers, like everything else, are just that. They are triggers. It's just like what you do with that trigger is what matters. It's like I give you a ball. Life throws you a ball. You can either kick it back or take it and run with it. So this is also one of the key components of triggers and non-transactional transformation. Be aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Usually, when I talk or think about transactionality and non-transactional transformation, I also try to figure out how and where can I have this? How can I achieve that? When we are trying to search for answers for non-transactional transformation, in whatever form it can be, I'm intentionally leaving it vague because it means different things to different people. Personal transformations are personal, right? I cannot give you my own personal experience for you to use. But when it comes to that questioning, when it comes to that approach of finding new, it's also about choosing the sublime over the mundane. Sublime doesn't need to be spiritual or anything. Sublime doesn't need to be nebular. You need to think about simple things that can be sublime. Sitting in a park, watching people go, not looking at your phone. You're already achieving a bit of a sublime. You're living the moment. A lot of people like to travel. However, traveling itself can be both sublime and mundane. In my opinion, the mundane part would be for you when you're traveling, you take photos of foods that you're eating, of places you're visiting, architecture and art, and so on and so forth. You post them on social media. You take probably 150, 200, 3,000 pictures, photos, never to look at them again. Think about this. You are documenting your life. You're not living it. Traveling can also be sublime, because then what you're doing, for me, it is actually sublime. When I'm traveling, it's time for self-reflection. It is time for reevaluation. It's time for me to look back on the journeys that I've had between my travels. And it can be sublime. It gets me closer to the sublime because I am working on my transformation, non-transactional transformation. The sublime, when you're traveling, is looking at a sunset over the ocean or over the desert or over the mountains. It is about watching a piece of art, looking at a piece of art or a piece of architecture, and thinking about the people, the person or the people who created those. Try to understand what motivated them. Going back to the first question, the question that I asked standing over Ibn Battuta's tomb. Many years ago, actually, I was hiking with my daughters, and one of them pointed out the sunset and said, Dad, look, such a beautiful sunset. Why don't you take a photo of it? And my initial reaction was to take my phone and wanted to, but I stopped. I said, yes, you're right. It is a beautiful sunset. Why don't we stand here and watch it together? This is one of the things that brings people together. This is one of the things that brings you closer to the sublime. Relations today, in today's world, have become, unfortunately, transactional. You give something to get something. You change because there is a reward. There is some kind of a satisfaction you're going to get out of that. Why don't you get the satisfaction out of actually you changing? Why don't you do something without being prompted to do so? Once you embark on a non-transactional transformation, you're actually getting closer to the sublime. You are getting closer to being changed yourself to become a better person. However you want to define that, there is no one size fits all. If you are basically messed up, then being a good person might be a messed up thing. But I think you get the idea. It's about being a good person, not for your own sake only, but also for the sake of your community or the people around you. I want to conclude by passing on the metaphorical ball to you. It's up to you to decide if you can choose, or you choose to do so, to embark on a journey of self-discovery and non-transactionality. You can begin that journey whenever you're ready, and may the fourth be with you.